The morning wash. Egypt. You wake up. Half asleep, you stumble to the sink. You splash cold water on your face and call it hygiene. But 4,000 years ago, that gesture was divine protocol. In ancient Egypt, cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness. It was godliness. Every sunrise, the priests of Ra performed the first wash. They weren't scrubbing dirt, they were scrubbing chaos. Egypt's whole worldview revolved around Ma'at, the balance of the cosmos. Order versus disorder. Light versus darkness. If a priest stepped into the temple unpurified, he risked letting Isfet, the force of chaos, seep in. So the ritual wasn't optional. It was a cosmic reset button. They used water drawn from the Nile, not any random puddle. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was the bloodstream of the gods. To dip your hands in it was to touch sacred circulation. The priests washed their faces, mouths, and even their tongues, so that no impure word could escape during prayer. You, meanwhile, are just trying to rinse out the bad breath from last night's pizza. Same gesture, different stakes. They began before dawn, in silence. You do it with the sound of notifications. Yet the logic hasn't changed. Both acts mark the same transition, from sleep to consciousness, from darkness to day. The Egyptians called it rebirth. You call it getting ready for work. Your bathroom mirror plays the role of a temple wall. Each reflection is a reminder that your face has to be restored before the world sees it. Ancient priests stared at polished copper mirrors, engraved with hieroglyphs invoking Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy. When you check your reflection, squint, and adjust your hair, you're reenacting the same anxious devotion, the need to be presentable before a higher power. Only now, that higher power is your own self-image. They even used scented oils after the wash, lotus, myrrh, and frankincense, not for vanity, but for sanctity. Fragrance was a way to invite gods into the skin. Modern perfume marketing has changed the story, but not the function. You still want to smell divine, only the altar is a workplace, not a shrine. And the soap, a recent invention. Egyptians used natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture from dry lake beds, the same compound they used for mummification. Every morning, wash was a micro-mummification, preserving the living body by the same chemistry that preserved the dead. When you lather up with your favorite brand, you're following the lineage of an empire that embalmed eternity itself. There's even evidence that household washing became democratized. Small altars with basins were found in private homes. Ritual purity was no longer for priests alone. Ordinary people wanted a piece of the divine routine. Sound familiar? Every self-care influencer is just another ancient Egyptian, live streaming Ma'at from a tiled bathroom. What you call refreshing was once metaphysical maintenance. The Temple of Karnak saw daily ablutions that synchronized human activity with the movement of the sun. Ra's rebirth in the sky depended on priests doing their part down below. So when you splash your face at dawn, you unconsciously join a relay older than history, one that connects the human body to the motion of stars. The sacred wash was also psychological armor. The Egyptians believed that impurity made one vulnerable to possession and misfortune. In their logic, a dirty face could invite disaster. You don't believe that, but notice how you feel after washing. More alert, less cursed, ready to exist. Maybe you haven't escaped their magic after all. So next time you turn on the tap, imagine you're at the edge of the Nile. The water hitting your skin isn't just water. It's the echo of an ancient promise that the day can begin again, clean, ordered, and alive. Because whether you serve Ra or your morning commute, the ritual still works. 2. Breakfast bread. Mesopotamia. You butter your toast and scroll your feed, It feels like the first act of a normal day. But 5,000 years ago, that same gesture would have been sacred theater. You are repeating the oldest prayer humanity ever invented, the one baked into bread. In ancient Mesopotamia, food was never just food. Every loaf, every sip, every grain was a transaction with the gods. The Sumerians believed their deities needed sustenance, not metaphorically, but literally. Temples smelled of baked bread because priests laid loaves before stone idols, not as symbols, but as offerings the gods could consume through essence. Before eating, the priests would place a portion of the bread on the altar. Only after the divine had been served could the humans dine. You still follow the same logic when you save the first slice for someone else, or when you say, thanks, before you eat. Gratitude, the ancient software, still runs beneath the crust. The bread itself was a miracle of chemistry and patience. In Uruk and Ur, bakers mixed crushed barley and emmer wheat with water, shaped the dough, and baked it in clay ovens that looked like miniature volcanoes. The smell of roasting grain filled entire streets, the scent of civilization itself. Bread was how Mesopotamia turned chaos into order. Grain from the field, fire from the kiln, nourishment from the void. Every loaf was proof that humans had mastered elements once ruled by gods. They even had goddess for it, Ninkasi, patron of bread and beer. Her hymns were not just religious songs. They were recipes in poetic disguise. "You are the one who bakes the bread in the big oven," one line says. You too follow her instructions when you preheat your toaster. Only your hymn plays on Spotify. But here's the absurd part. They didn't just eat bread, they believed through it. Breaking bread meant more than hunger. It meant order, peace, community. To share a loaf was to declare a pact. In a world of tribes and rival gods, bread was neutral ground. Even enemies could sit at the same table if the bread was blessed. When you share breakfast, you're unknowingly honoring the oldest ceasefire in human history. Archaeologists found temples filled with leftover loaves, perfectly carbonized, eternal snacks for eternal beings. Bread wasn't wasted, it was immortalized. Some still carry fingerprints pressed into the dough before baking. Literal touch from 3000 BCE, preserved by accident. That fingerprint could be yours. The act of eating after offering was called nisaku, a divine aftertaste. Once the gods had taken the spirit of the food, humans consumed the physical part, completing a cycle between heaven and stomach. You perform the same loop when you eat a meal that feels earned. You just call it satisfaction instead of salvation. In truth, breakfast remains a survival of temple logic. You wake, you offer, you eat. A triad of renewal. The coffee is your incense, the toast your sacrament. You might not believe in Enlil or Inanna, but the ritual shape hasn't changed. You begin each day by reaffirming that existence deserves to continue. And bread, that humble carbon and starch, carries millennia of theology. From Mesopotamia, it traveled to Egypt, then to Greece, then to Rome, mutating but never dying. Even the Christian Eucharist is its spiritual descendant, the body of a god disguised as a loaf. So the next time you lift a slice of bread, understand what you're doing. You are holding a relic that never stopped working, a fossil of faith that still feeds you. The first, "Thank you for another day," ever spoken, wasn't said with words. It was said with crumbs. You chew without thinking. The gods once listened to every bite. 3. Lighting candles, Greece and Rome. You strike a match and watch the wick catch fire. The flame trembles, small, obedient. You call it ambience. Soft light for dinner, a bath, a thought. But what you're really doing is conjuring a god. To the Greeks and Romans, flame was not a metaphor. It was divinity, alive and breathing. Every spark carried the breath of Apollo, the sun made small enough to fit inside a room. Lighting a candle was a quiet reenactment of dawn, an imitation of creation itself. When you ignite wax, you repeat their cosmic theft, stealing sunlight, taming it, bringing it indoors. The ancients believed each light had personality. The flicker was its soul, its dance a language. Temples glowed with hundreds of these miniature suns, each one an eye of the gods staring back. You think of candles as decoration, but for them, candles watched. The flame bore witness. They didn't use wax like you do. Greek lychnos were small clay lamps filled with olive oil, liquid sunlight, pressed from sacred trees. Olive oil burned clean, steady, and fragrant. When a flame guttered, they didn't just relight it. They whispered apologies. Extinguishing divine fire was bad. Manners. You blow your candle out after dessert. They called that an offense to Apollo. In Rome, the custom evolved. Homes had lararia, little shrines to household gods, the lares and penates. Each evening, citizens offered wine or grain and lit an oil lamp to remind the spirits, "We remember you. Please remember us." The light was both beacon and boundary, keeping ghosts out and family within. When you light a scented candle to set the mood, you're practicing domestic magic, an echo of Rome's nightly pact with invisible housemates. The ritual even followed you into religion. The first Christians adopted candle lighting not from scripture, but from empire. Early churches were dim caves. Candles turned darkness into holiness. By the Middle Ages, every flame symbolized prayer, an offering of light where words failed. The phrase, "burning for someone," still carries that residue. There's a reason flame hypnotizes. The human eye evolved to read stories in firelight, to see faces and movement in the flicker. Around prehistoric hearths, that motion meant safety, warmth, and company. By the time of Greece and Rome, that instinct had matured into worship. Fire wasn't just useful, it was moral. To let it die was neglect. To nurture it was duty. Even the act of replacement mattered. In Roman temples, priests carried everlasting flames, torches that never extinguished, passed down like dynastic bloodlines. The Vestal virgins guarded one in the temple of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. If it went out, it signaled disaster for the state. You, meanwhile, get anxious when your lighter runs out. Same panic, different mythology. The candle's slow melt fascinated philosophers. Stoics saw in it the lesson of impermanence, a body turning to vapor, consumed in service to illumination. Marcus Aurelius could have written your candle's obituary. You were made of wax, you became light, you did your job. Even now, we use candles for memory, vigils, birthdays, rituals of presence and absence. You light one for someone gone, or for someone you hope returns. That's not habit. That's a 2,000-year-old communication protocol with the beyond. So the next time you light a candle, know this. You're holding a domesticated sun, the child of Apollo and Vesta, burning politely on your countertop. You think you're setting the mood. You're actually maintaining the cosmos. Your ancestors lit fire for gods. You light it for peace. The difference is vocabulary, not meaning. The glow has always been the same. 4. Blowing on food. Ancient China. You lean over a bowl of soup. Steam fogs your face. You blow. A small puff, unthinking, automatic. To you, it's just cooling. To the ancients of China, it was a ritual of transfer, a moment when the living gave a fraction of their life to the meal that would sustain it. The Chinese concept of qi or qi wasn't abstract. It was breath made sacred, the invisible current that animated all existence. Every inhalation drew the cosmos in. Every exhalation returned a piece of yourself. To breathe upon something was to touch it with your inner world. The family meal, then, was not just shared food, it was shared vitality. 5,000 years ago, in Neolithic villages along the Yellow River, cooking itself was an act of balance between the 5 elements: fire, water, earth, metal, and wood. The pot that held the soup represented earth, the fire beneath it life's drive, and the steam rising from it the key escaping into air. To blow across that steam wasn't mere instinct, it was participation. You were regulating the harmony between elements. You still do that every time you huff across your noodles, performing an ancient balancing act disguised as impatience. By the Zhou dynasty, philosophy caught up with instinct. Texts, like the Book of Rites, described mealtime etiquette in cosmic terms. Breath should be calm, gestures measured, presence centered. To eat without mindfulness, they warned, is to waste the gift of heaven. So when you blow on soup, you unconsciously echo that law, tempering heat with awareness, pacing the consumption of life. There's another layer: respect. In old China, elders were often served the hottest dishes first, symbols of honor and abundance. To blow gently before eating was a small bow to humility, a way of cooling what heaven had made too intense, a gesture of temperance. You might think you're just avoiding a burnt tongue. They saw restraint, the difference between human civility and animal greed. Traditional Chinese medicine deepened the metaphor. The stomach was viewed as a cauldron of internal fire. Too much external heat, too fast, could disturb the harmony of qi, leading to imbalance. Blowing on food helped moderate the exchange between the fire within and the fire without. In other words, cooling soup was preventive medicine, a miniature act of health maintenance wrapped in common sense. But breath carried something personal too. Parents blew on their children's porridge, whispering affection into each exhalation. Lovers cooled tea for one another as a wordless promise. I'll take your heat upon myself. These gestures embedded emotion into physiology. Modern love still steals from that grammar, blowing on someone's drink, their wound, their skin. The idea that care travels through breath has never died. Later, Taoism turned qi into a cosmology. Breath was the link between flesh and void. Monks practiced controlled respiration, believing mastery of breath could lengthen life, even cheat death. Every inhalation was communion with the universe. And in that continuum, the dinner table became a humble dojo. To eat consciously was to exist consciously. You, sitting at your table, don't call it Taoism. You just blow because it's hot. Yet notice how ritual refuses to die. The motion is instinctive, rhythmic, small. But behind it stands a civilization that built metaphysics around the act of breathing. The absurd truth: you don't eat food, you merge with it. Every breath, every puff across a bowl, is an unspoken acknowledgement that life feeds life. So next time steam rises from your plate, don't rush it. That little cloud is the ghost of a very old conversation. Between body and cosmos, hunger and restraint, breath and being. You are not cooling soup. You are remembering how to live. 5. Knocking on wood. Celts. You tap the table after tempting fate. Knock on wood, you say, half joking, half serious. And just like that, you've spoken the language of the forest gods. To the ancient Celts, trees weren't background. They were the architecture of the universe, sentient pillars holding the sky apart from the earth. Each trunk carried its own soul, and each grove its own council of spirits. When you needed protection, you didn't pray upward, you reached sideways, to oak, ash, or yew. To touch wood was to touch something alive that could listen. They believed these spirits were easily startled, easily angered, but capable of mercy if addressed correctly. The knock was not a superstition, it was a code, a polite announcement. Spirit of this tree, hear me. Keep misfortune away. You repeat that gesture in diluted form, hoping algorithms or fate itself won't overhear your optimism. Archaeological traces of Celtic ritual confirm the intimacy between humans and wood. Sacred groves, nemeta, replaced temples. Priests of the old faith, the Druids, met there to interpret omens, heal, and sacrifice. Oak was most revered, the duir, the root word of door. Knocking on wood was literally knocking on the door to another realm. When you do it now, you are still tapping that threshold, asking unseen powers to let good luck stay inside. The gesture spread across Europe, mutating as it went. Germanic tribes had a similar habit, touching wood to summon Woden's favor. Early Christians absorbed it through another symbol, the cross. Touching or knocking wood became shorthand for invoking divine protection without naming it aloud. Over centuries, theology faded, but the muscle memory remained. Psychologists would later call it ritualized superstition, a way to regain control in uncertainty. But that explanation only confirms what the Celts already knew. Belief works through contact. You touch wood, you feel agency again. They touched oak, they felt gods again. The mechanics haven't changed, only the cosmology. Think of how reflexively you do it. You say something lucky. I haven't been sick all year, and immediately tap the nearest surface, as if apologizing to the universe for your arrogance. Ancient people feared nemesis. You fear jinx. Different vocabulary, same contract. Safety purchased through humility. The type of wood mattered once. Oak for strength, ash for healing, hazel for insight, rowan for warding off evil. Each species had personality, each grain a signature. Modern laminate doesn't have quite the same spirit, but you knock anyway. Your subconscious doesn't care about authenticity, it just wants continuity. In the Celtic imagination, wood remembered. Spirits lived within its rings, storing echoes of human touch. That's why knocking thrice became tradition. The first for calling, the second for communion, the third for thanks. Today, you abbreviate it into a single, embarrassed tap, but the code is still readable to time itself. Anthropologists sometimes call this the persistence of sympathetic magic. The idea that similarity or contact creates connection. The Celts didn't theorize it. They enacted it. They didn't hope for luck. They negotiated with it. Every tree was a contract written in bark. Now, centuries later, you sit in an office built from what they worshipped. Dead wood turned into furniture, yet somehow the instinct remains alive. When you knock, you're participating in a ghost trade. Superstition as survival, ritual as comfort. So next time you tap your desk, imagine an oak grove thick with mist, a druid whispering over roots, and the faint echo of your fingers crossing time. You think you're just avoiding bad luck. You're actually waking something that never stopped listening. 6. Sneezing and blessing. Ancient Rome. You sneeze. It's sudden, violent, involuntary. Your body convulses, your eyes shut. Your lungs empty themselves without permission. Someone nearby says, "Bless you." You nod, embarrassed, as if an ancient ritual just hijacked your day. It did. For the Romans, that sneeze wasn't a reflex. It was a brush with the afterlife. The idea was simple and terrifying. When you sneezed, your soul tried to escape through your nose. The act of blessing wasn't courtesy. It was containment. Jupiter save you, they said, to anchor your spirit back into your body. What you call politeness, they called soul retrieval. This fear of breath leaving the body was older than Rome itself. In many Indo-European languages, the words for breath, spirit, and life are identical. Spiritus in Latin, pneuma in Greek. To lose air was to risk losing essence. A sneeze was therefore a miniature death. You didn't catch a cold. You flirted with the underworld. Roman physicians, borrowing from Hippocratic medicine, understood sneezing as a purge, the body expelling bad air. But philosophy rarely outgrows superstition. Pliny the Elder wrote that sneezing at the wrong time could foretell disaster, but sneezing on your right side was lucky. They catalogued omens the way you catalogue allergies. One sneeze could signal divine warning, another could mean prosperity. Every nasal explosion was potential correspondence from the gods. When someone sneezed, Romans offered phrases like salve, be healthy, or Jupiter servete, may Jupiter protect you. The logic was the same across the empire. Invoke divine authority before misfortune, took advantage of the vulnerable moment. Because for an instant, during that uncontrollable eruption, you were defenseless, body open, mind blank, soul halfway out the door. The Greeks went further. In Homer's Odyssey, sneezing was taken as a sign of truth or destiny. When Penelope hears her son sneeze while she prays for revenge on the suitors, she takes it as confirmation from Zeus himself. A sneeze was the gods nodding, loudly. Try explaining that in a modern cafe. As the Roman world Christianized, the invocation shifted. Jupiter save you gave way to God bless you. Pope Gregory the Great, during the plague of 590 CE, allegedly encouraged the blessing because sneezing was a symptom of infection, a possible death sentence. The phrase became a preemptive prayer, not, may your soul return, but may it stay put. From then on, the blessing outlived the theology. Still, the physical reflex retained its mystical edge. Medieval people believed demons could enter through the mouth or nose during a sneeze. Saying bless you created a shield of sound. You, in your office or train or living room, carry that same instinct in miniature. You sneeze, someone blesses you, you both pretend it's manners. But what's really happening is a 2,000-year-old defense mechanism disguised as small talk. Modern science can't compete with that narrative power. It explains sneezing as a reflex arc. Irritation in the nasal mucosa triggers the medulla oblongata, expelling air at 160 kilometers per hour. Efficient, clinical, dull. The myth is truer than the biology because it feels right. A sneeze does feel like something escapes. The ancient mind simply took that sensation literally. Even now, if no one blesses you, the silence feels wrong, as if the ritual was left incomplete. That discomfort is the residue of Rome. Civilization may have shifted its pantheon, but the body still worships through reflex. So when you sneeze, don't dismiss the blessing. It's not superstition, it's infrastructure, an unbroken chain of human fear and empathy. Every bless you is a small exorcism, a micro-liturgy against mortality. You call it etiquette. The Romans called it survival. 7. Handshakes. Greece to medieval Europe. You extend your hand to greet someone. Skin meets skin. Grip, release, smile. You think it's manners. It isn't. It's a ritual of surrender disguised as friendship. The handshake is one of humanity's oldest peace spells. In Homeric Greece, when two warriors met after battle, the outstretched hand meant, I am unarmed. A truce, but also a test, because trust had to be proven through touch. You opened your palm, they opened theirs, and both pretended the world wasn't dangerous for 3 seconds. Civilization began in those 3 seconds. Greek pottery shows it clearly. Kings, gods, and soldiers locking hands, not as equals, but as participants, in a contract older than writing. The gesture was called dexiosis, from dexios, right hand. The right was sacred, symbol of honor and truth. Oaths were sworn by it, deals sealed with it. When you shake hands, you still invoke that ancient idea, that truth can be transferred through flesh. Rome inherited the ritual and professionalized it. Senators clasped forearms rather than palms, a grip harder to fake, harder to betray. The dextrarum junctio, joining of right hands, became the empire's visual shorthand for alliance. Coins showed emperors and generals clasping hands beneath the gaze of gods. The message was clear: peace through pressure. To withdraw your hand too soon was treason of the body. When Rome fell, the handshake went underground, resurfacing in the feudal chaos of medieval Europe. Knights meeting on the road would raise open hands to show they carried no hidden dagger. Later, they gripped forearms again, to ensure no blade was tucked in the sleeve. The handshake was not born from trust. It was born from paranoia. Your nice to meet you is a fossilized security check. Anthropologists call it a ritual of symmetrical vulnerability. Two people expose the most fragile part of their body, the palm, dense with nerves and open bloodlines. That small act of risk makes cooperation possible. Every handshake is a miniature peace treaty signed in skin. But the gesture's mythology didn't stop at Europe. Across cultures, the same logic emerged: touch as truce. In ancient Persia, allies grasped hands before sharing bread. In parts of Africa and Asia, bowing replaced it, lowering oneself instead of exposing one's hand. Different forms, same grammar, submission to trust. Then came commerce. By the Renaissance, merchants used handshakes to close deals when written contracts were scarce. The gesture traveled with trade ships and empires, carrying its invisible contract into the modern world. You shake to seal, to finalize, to prove you're human. The form is ancient. The content keeps mutating. Even today, the handshake's choreography is loaded with silent meaning. Too soft, you signal weakness. Too firm, aggression. Too long, discomfort. Every grip is a negotiation of dominance, a relic of when a single twitch could mean life or death. During pandemics, you stopped shaking hands. You called it safety. But something deeper cracked. A neural ache older than reason. The body missed its ancient ritual. Civilization, briefly, forgot how to begin peace. You don't think about that now, but your nervous system does. Each handshake still carries thousands of years of encoded memory. The fear of the knife, the relief of touch, the miracle of coexistence. So the next time your hand meets another, remember, you are reenacting a ceasefire signed by the first humans who realized killing everyone made trade difficult. And speaking of ancient pacts, this channel works the same way. You and I meet across time, exchanging ideas instead of weapons. If you've made it this far, subscribe, not as tribute, but as handshake. The modern oath of curiosity, the same old piece, rewritten in pixels. 8. Birthday candles. Ancient Greece. You light candles on a cake and call it a party. You count them, blow them out, make a wish. Everyone cheers, and wax drips like clockwork. But long before anyone sang you happy birthday, those flames were part of a moonlit religion. In ancient Greece, people didn't celebrate their birthdays. They celebrated the gods. The 6th day of each lunar month belonged to Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon. Her devotees baked round honey cakes shaped like the full moon, crowned with burning tapers to mimic her silver glow. Each flame was a fragment of her light returned to the sky. When you blow your candles, you're still performing that exchange, exhaling mortal breath towards something divine. The custom was not about self. It was about orbit. To the Greeks, everything revolved around celestial order, day and night, waxing and waning, mortality and renewal. Lighting candles on a circular cake wasn't decoration, it was cosmology. The flame stood for vitality, the circle, eternity. The offering connected human life to lunar rhythm. You still honor that rhythm each year, whether or not you notice that your calendar repeats like a full moon. The cakes themselves were not sweet indulgences, but ritual tools, made with honey, barley, and goat cheese, ingredients sacred to Artemis. The scent rising from them was believed to carry prayers heavenward, because the gods preferred fragrance over words. Smoke was language. The higher it climbed, the louder it spoke. You repeat that syntax when you blow and watch the smoke curl upward, hoping the universe is still listening. Even the act of blowing has lineage. The Greeks thought breath was sacred, the psyche, the soul's wind. To exhale toward a flame was to fuse desire with essence. You extinguish to send your wish, but to them, it was communication, not destruction. The candle didn't die, it delivered. When the Romans adopted Greek customs, they quietly shifted the ritual from goddess to individual. By the time of Emperor Augustus, birthdays became civic events, marking the favor of the gods toward a specific life. Offerings, torches, and candles followed, tools to illuminate one's fortune. Roman families lit lamps for newborns to guard them from malevolent spirits, the same logic that makes you guard your birthday with light before plunging it into darkness. The Christian world later denounced pagan birthday rites as vanity, only to absorb them centuries later. Monasteries kept candles burning for saints on their feast days. Over time, the light returned to ordinary people. By the 18th century, German Kinderfeste used candles to mark a child's age, one flame for each year, plus an extra for the year to come. A miniature prophecy of survival. You still do it, though now you call it tradition, not theology. Symbolically, nothing has changed. The candle burns as life burns, finite, glowing, self-consuming. Each year adds one more reminder of time's appetite. The act of blowing them out pretends to defy it, as if wish could overwrite mortality. It never could, but the ritual persists because pretending has power. Think of it. You gather friends, light the fire, invoke breath, offer smoke. It's a sequence straight from a Bronze Age temple, repackaged with frosting. Even the cheer when the candles vanish mirrors an ancient idea that human breath, properly directed, can influence fate. You call it a birthday. The Greeks would call it worship with snacks. So when you close your eyes and make that silent wish, understand what you're doing. You are standing in the shadow of Artemis's altar, sending a puff of modern air into a 2,500-year-old sky. You think you're celebrating yourself. You're actually reenacting the universe's oldest party trick, turning fire into hope. 9. Toasting drinks, medieval Europe. You raise your glass. Someone says, cheers. You clink, you smile, you sip. It feels like manners, maybe habit. But in the Middle Ages, that same motion could save your life. Back then, to drink with someone was not an act of friendship. It was a test of faith. Poison was the silent weapon of choice among nobles, assassins, and overambitious heirs. A banquet was a battlefield disguised as dinner. Trust had to be proven, not assumed. So people invented the liquid handshake, the toast. The origin is mechanical and paranoid. When you clinked wooden goblets hard enough, the contents sloshed and mingled. If your host had laced your wine, he risked swallowing it too. Mutual destruction as peace treaty. That's why the gesture required eye contact. It wasn't politeness. It was surveillance. Look at me, it said. while we both pretend this isn't about death. By the 14th century, this ritual had become law at feasts across Europe. Chronicles describe knights crashing their mugs so violently that ale spilled across the table, a show of sincerity through spillage. The louder the clank, the louder the message. I trust you enough to risk drinking. The word toast itself came later. In medieval England, people would place a spiced piece of bread, the toast, at the bottom of the cup to absorb sediment or flavor cheap wine. After the drink, the bread was offered to an honored guest, symbolically consuming the goodwill of the company. You raise your glass today, but you've forgotten that you once ate the toast. Wine and ale were already sacred in older rituals. The Greeks poured libations to Dionysus before drinking. The Romans toasted the emperor's health with the formula propino tibi salutem, I drink to your health. But the medieval world added fear. God watched, yes, but so did human treachery. Every sip carried risk. That's what gave the gesture weight. When Christianity absorbed the toast, it repurposed the danger into blessing. Drinking to someone's health became a verbal charm. To your life, to your prosperity, God save the king. The toast migrated from the table to the tongue, from defense to celebration. You no longer fear poison, but you still invoke the old spell. Notice how ritual clings to physics. The sound of the clink engages the last neglected sense. You already see the drink, smell it, taste it, feel it. Hearing completes the cycle. Medieval thinkers called it total communion. To drink without sound was incomplete. The gods might not notice. You still follow the formula without knowing why. Liquid, motion, sound, gaze, sip. It's choreography inherited from the paranoid elite. In modern bars, the gesture has lost its sharpness, but not its charge. Cheers compresses 1,000 years of anxiety into one syllable. The toast remains the shortest contract you'll ever sign. 2 hands, 1 sound, a silent promise. I wish you no harm. And the irony persists. You toast to health with alcohol, to clarity with intoxication, to long life with something that shortens it. The contradiction is the point. It's a ritual that acknowledges mortality while defying it. You raise your cup to the inevitable and drink anyway. So next time you clink glasses, remember the medieval table. Candlelight flickering on steel cups, eyes watching eyes, fear turned into etiquette. Every toast was a tiny rebellion against suspicion, a fragile bridge of trust built from sound and liquid. You think it's social lubrication. They thought it was self-defense. And in truth, it's still both. 10. Weddings. Ancient Rome. You stand before a crowd, dressed in white, exchanging rings, smiling for cameras. You call it a wedding. The Romans would have called it spell work. The ceremony you recognize as love made official began as a contract between families and gods. Marriage in Rome wasn't about romance. It was about property, lineage, and divine order. Yet the pageantry you still perform was born in their temples and homes. Every lace, every vow, every circle of gold is a fossil from a pagan ritual that never quite died. The Romans had several forms of marriage, but the oldest, confariatio, was pure theater of the sacred. The bride and groom sat before the household gods, sharing a cake of spelt grain as priests invoked Jupiter. The bread symbolized unity. Eating it together bound their fates. You still cut a cake together, unaware that you're repeating a 2,000-year-old communion disguised as dessert. Before vows came binding. The priest took a woolen cord and tied the couple's right hands together, literally creating one body in the eyes of the gods. This was the origin of tying the knot. Wool wasn't random. It was sacred to the goddess Vesta, guardian of the hearth. Her thread represented Domestic stability, continuity, flame that never dies. You wear a ring now, a loop of metal instead of fiber. But the meaning hasn't changed, permanence through binding. The color white entered the ritual later, not from Christianity, but from pagan Rome. Brides wore the tunicum rectum, a long white garment woven in a single piece, tied at the waist with a nodus herculeneus, the knot of Hercules, symbol of fertility and endurance. Only the husband could untie it on the wedding night. The modern white dress pretends to be about purity. Originally, it was about strength and continuity, blessed by myth, not morality. The veil, too, came from them. Roman brides wore a flame-colored flammeum over their hair, representing both modesty and transformation, a living ember being carried from her father's hearth to her husband's. When you lift a veil today, you're reenacting a rite of fire transfer, not just romance. The modern kiss replaces the priest's invocation. The photographer replaces the household god. Marriage was also political theater. Noble families used it to merge estates and secure alliances. Love could happen, but it wasn't the point. The gods were witnesses. The state was enforcer. Breaking that bond was sacrilege as much as scandal. You still echo that logic when you treat marriage licenses as holy documents and divorce as taboo. Bureaucracy is just theology with paperwork. Even the guests had assigned roles. Friends followed the bride to her new home, carrying torches and shouting obscene jokes to chase away evil spirits. The crowd, the laughter, the ceremony, all protective noise. You still invite a crowd, hire music, fill the air with chaos so that, symbolically, no dark force can follow the couple home. You think it's celebration. The ancients thought it was exorcism. And then there's the ring, the circle with no end. The Romans wore it on the fourth finger of the left hand because they believed a vein ran directly from that spot to the heart, the vena amoris. Science later disproved it. Symbolism ignored the correction. The gesture survived because it feels right. Touch heart, promise eternity. Rationality has never beaten ritual. So when you walk down an aisle strewn with petals, wearing white, exchanging rings and vows, understand what you're doing. You are performing a Roman contract rewritten by centuries of fashion. Your wedding isn't new. It's continuity disguised as novelty. You call it the happiest day of your life. They called it binding two fates before Jupiter. Both mean the same thing. Two lives caught in one knot, tied by gods you stopped believing in, but never stopped obeying. 11. Funeral flowers. Ancient Egypt. You walk into a funeral home carrying flowers. Their colors look gentle, their fragrance heavy, their purpose unspoken. You think it's respect. It began as fear. The Egyptians were the first to weaponize beauty against decay. In their world, death was not an ending but a dangerous threshold, the point where flesh tried to cross into eternity. That crossing needed disguise. The living covered the dead in fragrance so the gods would not smell rot and reject the soul. Flowers were not decoration, they were camouflage. The Nile Valley, despite its desert edges, bloomed with sacred plants. Lotus, papyrus, blue water lilies, symbols of rebirth. The lotus especially ruled funerals. It opened with the sun, closed at dusk, mirroring life and death. Priests placed them on corpses and in coffins, believing their scent helped the car, the life force, find its way back each morning. You still do the same. Fill a silent room with aroma and color to make the unbearable tolerable. Archaeologists found garlands of flowers around the mummies of pharaohs and nobles, dried yet intact. Tutankhamun's tomb held wreaths of cornflowers and olive leaves woven with golden thread. The message was clear. Eternity should smell alive. Even the poorest families offered whatever they could, handfuls of desert blooms, herbs, or perfume poured on shrouds. Scent became theology. To smell of sweetness meant to belong among the gods. The Egyptian word for perfume, senetjer, meant to make divine. The embalming process itself was a perfume ritual, 30 days of anointing with oils of cedar, myrrh, and cinnamon. The dead were not preserved for nostalgia, but prepared for conversation with immortality. You, with your store-bought bouquet, repeat that impulse on a smaller scale. You fight entropy with fragrance. When Greek travelers saw Egyptian funerals, they imported the custom. They too began adorning graves with wreaths, calling them stephanoi, crowns for the victorious soul. Later, the Romans absorbed the idea, blending flowers with incense, turning burials into scented parades. Christianity inherited both gesture and denial, the belief that beauty could soften mortality. A sweet smell became proof of sanctity. Saints' bodies were said to exude odor of holiness. Modern funerals kept the props, but lost the cosmology. You bring lilies, roses, chrysanthemums, species chosen not for theology, but for endurance. Yet subconsciously, the code remains. Fragrance equals transcendence. The smell must say what words can't, that death isn't winning. There's a reason funerals are floral, not silent. Flowers decay elegantly. They die in public, beautifully. They perform what we cannot, a dignified surrender. Egyptians understood that performance. Their entire mortuary culture was built on aesthetic control over decay. You copy that control every time you walk past an open casket and pretend it looks peaceful. In truth, every bouquet at a funeral is a lie told in color. But it's a necessary lie. The same one ancient priests whispered while sprinkling petals over corpses. You are still beautiful. You are still part of the cycle. Humans have always needed that illusion. Without it, death is too literal. The perfume that fills a funeral room is not for the dead. It's anesthesia for the living. The Egyptians knew this better than anyone. They embalmed bodies to calm the survivors. You spray air freshener. The technology changed, the psychology didn't. So when you place flowers beside a coffin, remember what you're really doing. You're participating in an unbroken act of denial, refined into art. You're reenacting the first human attempt to civilize death's odor, to replace the smell of endings with the scent of eternity. The bouquet will wither, as intended. It's not supposed to last. It's supposed to remind you that beauty always dies. And that's how we cope. You call it tribute. The Egyptians called it preservation. Both mean the same thing, fighting death with fragrance. 12. Blowing out candles. Medieval magic. You take a deep breath. The candles flicker. You exhale, and light dies. Everyone claps, you smile, pretending it's a game. But once, that gesture could get you accused of witchcraft. In the medieval world, breath was power. To command fire with air, to make flame obey your lungs, was not child's play. It was sorcery. For centuries, to blow out a candle meant more than extinguishing light. It meant taming one of the primal elements, bending it to human will. You do it now as a wish. They did it as proof that the boundary between mortal and divine could be crossed by breath alone. In early medieval Europe, fire itself was sacred property. The church called it ignis sacer, holy fire, because it represented both divine presence and divine judgment. Fire purified, punished, revealed. It was God's signature, visible and untouchable. To control it outside sanctioned rituals was risky. Monasteries kept candles burning perpetually, symbolizing the eternal spirit. Letting one die was sin. Extinguishing it deliberately was heresy. Yet even then, old pagan reflexes survived. Rural households used breath to speak to fire. Blowing softly across a hearth before sleeping was a charm of safety, a way to quiet the element so it wouldn't awaken in anger. In Scandinavia, women whispered protective verses while snuffing candles to prevent wandering spirits from following the smoke. In Celtic lands, breath carried the weight of prayer. To exhale toward flame was to seal a wish in invisible ink. Alchemy later gave these instincts a new language. Fire was one of the 4 elemental principles, governed by sulfur and transformation. Breath, meanwhile, was the subtle force that animated matter. When alchemists exhaled across a flame, they enacted the union of opposites. Air meeting fire, spirit meeting body. You still perform that alchemy when you blow on candles at a birthday, merging breath and flame, body and symbol. You call it luck. They called it the great work. By the late Middle Ages, the act had fractured into 2 meanings: sacred and dangerous. In churches, priests used special instruments called extinguishers to snuff candles respectfully. No breath allowed, because human air was profane. Outside, in taverns or homes, common people did it anyway. They blew, it worked, fire obeyed. And because it worked, the suspicion lingered. Women who muttered charms while darkening a candle's flame were sometimes branded as witches, accused of stealing fire from God. Still, the allure of breath persisted. Something intimate happens when you kill light with your lungs. The candle bends, quivers, dies, and smoke curls upward, a visible trace of your invisible act. Humans crave that immediacy, control over chaos, proof that the world still listens. That craving is what keeps the ritual alive. When the Enlightenment finally dethroned demons and saints, the superstition dissolved into domestic routine. The wish survived, stripped of theology but not of magic. Children now do what alchemists and peasants once did: exhale hope into darkness. The words changed, the impulse didn't. Notice the choreography: the deep inhale, life; the focused breath, intention; the vanishing flame, transformation. It's a complete symbolic cycle. You breathe in existence, you breathe out desire. You watch it fade into smoke. That's spellcraft, whether you believe in it or not. So when you stand before a cake or candlelit table, close your eyes and blow. Remember, you're reenacting a band art. You're commanding an element that terrified your ancestors. You're performing the oldest kind of magic: manipulation through breath. One breath, one wish, one extinguished sun. You think it's a game of birthdays. It's actually a negotiation with chaos. The last surviving spell humanity forgot was a spell. 13. Clapping. Ancient rituals of approval. You clap. A sound made of collision. Skin striking skin. Rhythm born from impact. You think it's appreciation, celebration, noise. But in its origin, applause was a public spell. Long before audiences and stages, clapping was invocation. The Romans perfected it, but they didn't invent it. The earliest records come from Egypt and Mesopotamia, where rhythmic striking of hands or objects summoned gods or marked divine presence. The gesture was sonic submission, mortals declaring attention. You clap today for performers, they clapped for immortals. In Rome, applause became political theater. Citizens didn't just clap, they performed entire vocabularies of approval. There was plaudite, polite clapping; bombus, roaring noise; imbrices, cupped hands mimicking thunder. Each pattern told the emperor how pleased the crowd was. When Nero performed as singer or lyre player, he hired claques, professional applauders, to orchestrate admiration. Applause became currency, sound as loyalty. The Colosseum magnified it. Tens of thousands of hands striking in unison could sound like weather. The emperor would raise a thumb. The crowd would answer with rhythm. The empire condensed into percussion. In that echo, politics met liturgy. You think you're applauding an artist. They were reaffirming divine authority. Temples had their own acoustics. Priests encouraged rhythmic handstrikes or drum beats to awaken gods during processions. The logic was primitive but consistent. Noise maintains existence. Silence was death. Sound was presence. The same instinct drives modern stadiums and concerts. The fear of quiet, the relief of shared vibration. Clapping migrated through the centuries as religion shifted. Early Christians discouraged it during worship. Too pagan, too bodily. Yet by the Middle Ages, congregations were again striking hands to emphasize Amen, or to celebrate miracles. Rituals survive even when forbidden. They just change grammar. Anthropologists trace applause to the human need for synchronization. A group producing rhythm becomes cohesive. Pulse aligning pulse. Tribes chanted, marched, or clapped to fuse individuals into one organism. The Romans exploited that biology. Emperors knew that collective noise equals obedience. You still obey that reflex. When the lights go down and someone begins to clap, you join, not out of thought, but instinct, an inherited survival mechanism dressed as politeness. Even the phrase, "give them a hand," carries the echo of divine favor. To clap was once to offer hands, physical tokens of allegiance. The performer, priest, or ruler absorbed that energy. Today it's symbolic, but the psychology remains transactional. The audience gives, the subject receives. Notice how applause has hierarchies. In a theater, it begins tentative, then spreads like contagion until all participate. The few lead, the many follow. The same happened in Roman forums. Senators started, plebeians echoed. It's democracy's oldest illusion, voluntary participation through sound. And silence, its twin, still holds power. Refusing to clap is mutiny. In ancient courts it could mean treason, now it's dissent. The absence of sound still stings, because applause was never neutral. It was verdict. Your hands don't know that history, but they perform it faithfully. Each collision releases a microburst of heat, a tiny echo of fire. You strike them together, summoning attention, giving form to approval. What began as devotion to Jupiter has become reflex toward entertainers, leaders, screens. But the function is identical. You reaffirm order through rhythm. So the next time you clap, remember what you're truly doing. You're calling back a god who left the stage 2 millennia ago. You're offering your noise to power, just like the Romans. Only now the empire you serve is attention itself. You think it's applause. It's actually liturgy in disguise. Your hands remembering religion after your mind forgot it. 14. New Year's celebrations. Babylon. You count down from 10, raise a glass, and tell yourself this year will be different. You promise to be better, kinder, thinner, richer, calmer. You call them resolutions. The Babylonians called them survival. 4,000 years ago, on the banks of the Euphrates, the Empire of Babylon invented the new year. Not in January. Theirs began in Nisanu, around the spring equinox, when the Tigris flooded and fields woke from winter. It was not a party, it was a covenant. Their festival, Akitu, lasted 12 days. Half harvest ritual, half cosmic audit. Humans renewed their loyalty to the gods, so the universe wouldn't fall apart for another cycle. You just renew your gym membership. The ritual began with fear. Winter had weakened the world. Order needed rebooting. Priests of Marduk, the city's supreme god, carried his golden statue from the temple to a ceremonial house outside the city walls. There, they reenacted creation, chaos defeated, cosmos rebuilt. The king had to humble himself before the statue, stripped of his regalia, slapped by the high priest until he wept. His tears were proof that Marduk's favor remained. Your champagne hangover is the echo of that humiliation, a gentler form of penance. After the king's purification, the people made vows. They returned borrowed goods, repaid debts, released slaves. Promises were not moral gestures, but tools to restore balance, acts that kept divine order, me, in motion. To fail those vows risked offending the gods, inviting famine or flood. You, centuries later, break your resolution by February and call it human nature. They called it blasphemy. The structure of Akitu was cyclical and theatrical. Each day symbolized one stage of the universe's recreation: mourning, purification, sacrifice, renewal. On the final day, Marduk's effigy returned to Babylon, escorted by priests and cheering crowds. The city erupted in celebration: drums, flutes, chants, torches. Life had been rebooted. Time had restarted. You mirror that sequence each December: regret, promise, celebration, hangover. The only difference is that you replaced gods with fireworks. Even their resolutions were familiar. Clay tablets describe citizens vowing to honor contracts, repay creditors, treat workers fairly, worship properly. These were practical oaths, not emotional ones. But beneath them was the same human need: to rewrite failure, to declare control over a chaotic world. Every "this year will be different" is an Akitu echo, a desperate assertion that time can be tamed by will. The Babylonians measured years by the stars, not the calendar. The equinox was proof that nature kept its side of the contract. You celebrate by watching a clock hit midnight, an artificial alignment of digits. Yet the sensation is the same: relief, renewal, illusion. Time begins again because you say it does. That is magic disguised as scheduling. Later, civilizations adopted the ritual and repackaged it. The Romans moved the new year to January, honoring Janus, god of beginnings, a two-faced deity looking backward and forward at once. His symbol was a door, his essence transition. Your New Year, New Me slogan is a modern prayer to Janus with better marketing. And the fireworks, they trace back to Babylon too. Torches and loud noise were used to scare away the lingering demons of the old year. You replaced torches with gunpowder, demons with anxiety. Function unchanged. So when you stand under glittering light, counting seconds, shouting promises into the air, you're not making resolutions. You're reenacting a 4,000-year-old maintenance ritual designed to reset the universe. You think you're celebrating the future. The Babylonians knew the truth. Every new year is just humanity begging time to forgive it one more time. 15. Saying goodbye. Old English prayer. You leave a room and say goodbye. A small sound, automatic, barely conscious. You don't mean it as a prayer, but it is one. Once, every farewell carried theology. The phrase you shorten into routine began as a blessing: God be with ye. Spoken slowly, it was a wish, not a closure. May the divine accompany you into uncertainty. Time condensed it. Consonants collapsed. Vowels blurred. God be with ye became God bewai, then goodbye. What you now pronounce without thought once bound heaven to human parting. The need behind it is older than language. To say farewell was always an act of protection. Departure created vulnerability. Absence opened doors for danger. Ancient travelers leaving a village asked shamans, priests, or family elders to invoke spirits of guidance. Every goodbye was a spell against the unknown. You still perform it, just without the ceremony. In the early Middle Ages, English peasants used dozens of variations. God speed, God keep thee, Christ go with you. The words shifted with theology, but the impulse stayed the same. Never let someone leave unguarded. Travel meant risk, plague, bandits, weather, war. A spoken blessing was insurance. Your casual bye is a fossilized shield. Even pagan Europe did it. Before Christianity, the Norse said farvel. Travel well, literally farewell, from which modern farewell comes. It was both wish and warning. Greeks used share, rejoice. Romans said veil, be strong. Every civilization built some linguistic bridge between presence and distance. To say nothing was to invite misfortune. Silence after parting felt like tempting the void. Christianity only amplified the anxiety. To be unblessed was to be spiritually exposed. So language became portable liturgy, blessings disguised as syntax. Good morning, good night, goodbye. All once meant, may God make it good. The word good itself carried divine weight, derived from the same Proto-Germanic root as God. Every polite exchange was an invocation of holiness. You think you're being courteous. You're reciting theology with your mouth half full of coffee. Even in its faded form, the phrase still holds emotional residue. It makes departure tolerable, defines the boundary between connection and absence. That's why it feels wrong when someone leaves without saying it. The ritual wasn't completed. The brain senses unfinished business because the species once equated unspoken farewells with spiritual danger. Languages worldwide carry their own versions. Adios to God, adieu to God, ciao from I am your servant, shalom, peace, salam, peace. The vocabulary shifts, but the architecture remains. Every culture stitched protection into goodbye. The logic is constant. If we cannot accompany each other physically, we can at least send the voice ahead as guardian. Over centuries, the sacred meaning drained away, leaving etiquette behind. Industrial time compressed speech. People left faster, blessed less. Yet the nervous system hasn't caught up. We still crave that linguistic closure. To not say goodbye feels superstitiously wrong, as if the link between worlds remains open. That is ritual memory masquerading as manners. Even technology didn't erase it. You end calls, texts, and messages with bye, though the risk of cosmic misfortune is zero. The gesture persists because the human psyche can't stand unritualized endings. The word is the hinge between presence and void, a whispered assurance that the story continues elsewhere. So when you step away, mutter goodbye, and barely mean it, understand what you're invoking. You are performing a prayer in ruins, language that forgot its God, but kept its structure. Every farewell is a survival of faith. Every exit, a miniature exorcism against uncertainty. You close doors with sound because silence feels too infinite. You think you're just leaving. You're actually consecrating distance. So you scroll, you text, you eat, you cheer, thinking it's all casual. But every act is an echo. You're not just living history. You are history, performing the same old magic under fluorescent light.
Subscribe to Ancient Absurdity.